Before we get into today's show, let me tell you about the latest deal from Mike Lindell, MyPillow. Once again, the big box stores have canceled their orders simply because they don't agree with Mike Lindell's politics. They don't like it because he supports President Trump. Well, he's going to pass that savings on to you. No more middleman. And boy, does he have some great deals on the Giza Dream sheets and the Percal bed sheets. Listen to this. Giza Dream queen size, normally $139.98. Your wholesale price, $69.99 when you use promo code Joey. King size, only $79.99. The Percal queen size, normally $89.98. Your wholesale price, $29.98 when you use promo code Joey. Just call 1-800-893-4059 or go to MyPillow.com. Always use promo code Joey. Free shipping options available. This allotment's not going to last very long. When they're gone, they're gone. MyPillow.com. Promo code Joey. Thanks for joining me in the PhD Weight Loss and Nutrition Studios. To lose weight for the last time, visit myphdweightloss.com. Welcome in. Thanks for spending a few minutes of your day with me. Here's what we're going to be covering today. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth says that the U.S. has control of the Strait of Hormuz during a surprisingly civil testimony before House and Senate appropriators on the Pentagon's record-breaking $1.5 trillion budget. We got the details on you. The War Secretary also is defending our munitions stockpile, dismissing recent reports that we are running low on weapons because of the war in Iran. We'll break it down for you. Should restaurants automatically charge you a tip, regardless of service? As Europeans prepare to visit the U.S. for the World Cup, Missouri restaurant officials are proposing a controversial solution in the form of automatic tipping to ensure the restaurant workers are paid, they say. The South Carolina Senate basically said no to President Trump yesterday by rejecting a push to redraw the state's congressional lines just weeks before the primaries. GOP leaders in the state Senate say it's legally unnecessary and wrong for South Carolina at this point. Also, the state Republican Party plans to challenge the state's open primary elections in federal court, arguing the party should be able to restrict who can select its nominees. There's a lot to cover. It's Breaking News Wednesday. Glad to have you along.
I told you we'd be back.
And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free.
It's Joey Hudson.
I wanted to name it the Joey Hudson bill, but, they don't allow you to put names on bills. But I wanted to call it the Joey Hudson bill because I know that one's been near and dear to you for a number of years.
That's how it's done. Let your voice be heard.
And the truth shall set you free.
Here's Joey Hudson.
Let's start with Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. He is insisting that the U.S. has control of the Strait of Hormuz. The Pentagon fended off tough questions about the war in Iran and bipartisan skepticism that the Department of War hasn't been sufficiently transparent with the public on some of the key details of the Iran conflict. Mr. Hegseth told the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense, because they're talking money here, they're talking about a $1.5 trillion budget for the War Department. So the senators had some pointed questions for the secretary. Mr. Hegseth said, though, I don't think enough has been stated about the blockade and the power of the blockade and the dilemma that our blockade creates for the Iranian people. He said they can't move anything out of Iranian ports and over. I think it's 65 ships at this point have been turned around or disabled. But ultimately, we can control the strait because nothing's going on that we don't allow to go on. Now, Democrats didn't buy that narrative and underscore how traffic through the choke point, where over a fifth of the world's seaborne oil supplies once flowed through annually, has largely ground to a halt. Senator Chris Coons, the Democrat from Delaware, repeatedly asked Mr. Hegseth about why the U.S. doesn't reopen the Strait of Hormuz if Washington has control of it. Criticizing the U.S. Appears to be on the verge of a strategic loss, he said, as he's very critical of how the War Department is handling this, if in fact we do have control of the strait. Hegseth interrupted, saying, "So foolish. We have more leverage than we've ever had. We've had incredible battlefield successes, and you're talking about a strategic loss." Now, hours earlier, before this testimony, President Trump told radio host Sid Rosenberg that the U.S. doesn't have to rush anything, and he argued that the blockade is tightening the screws on Iran. The president also was resolute that the U.S. would get Iran's nuclear capabilities. He called it nuclear dust. He later told reporters they'll either do the right thing or we'll finish the job. Now, during the back-to-back hearings, Mr. Hegseth refused to confirm or deny reporting that only 30% of Iran's missile capacity was destroyed in the war. He argued a public setting wasn't the place to do that. Basically, he doesn't want to talk about the secrets of the war on either side, on our side or what we know about the Iranians. The secretary also downplayed concerns about America's munitions stockpile. That was a big question that came up during the discussion, too. He dismissed concerns about a potential weapons shortage. He said the munitions issue has been foolishly and unhelpfully overstated. We have all the munitions needed to execute what we need to execute. Now, again, the Democrats are trying to, it's kind of like get him into a catch-a moment. And he masterfully avoided it. But why would they be asking the question anyway? Why would they want to, for the Secretary of War to announce to the world that we don't have any weapons or we don't have enough? I mean, isn't that kind of foolish? Even if you are a Democrat. I mean, I know Democrats aren't always the smartest people in the room, but wouldn't you think they'd have enough, they would be smart enough to understand we don't need to be talking about our weapon supply in front of the whole world? Mr. Hegseth reiterated that stance during a recent congressional hearing when he pushed back directly on claims that U.S. inventories have been significantly drawn down. He said, I take issue with the characterization that munitions are depleted in a public forum. It's just not true. Again, why keep asking him this type of question? Senator Mark Kelly was one of the leading Democrats, said after a recent classified briefing that it is shocking how deep we have gone into these magazines, pointing to heavy use of systems including Tomahawk cruise missiles, Army tactical missile systems, and Patriot air defense interceptors. Secretary Hegseth responded by accusing Mr. Kelly of improperly discussing sensitive information, suggesting the former Navy pilot may have violated his oath. I hope that they'll look into that. Hegseth posted on X, Captain Mark Kelly strikes again. Now he's blabbing on TV falsely and dumbly about a classified Pentagon briefing he received. Did he violate his oath again? Look, if in fact this was a classified briefing and the senator is talking about this publicly, should he be held accountable? Text me, email me, joey@joeyhudson.com. Leave me a message on the MyPillow message line, 864-477-JOEY, 864-477-5639. Senator Kelly pushed back, saying the information was not classified, and said that Mr. Hegseth had made similar remarks publicly in recent testimony. The senator said that the cost of the conflict had yet to be fully explained to the American people. Kane offered a more measured assessment, telling lawmakers that U.S. forces currently have sufficient munitions for what we've tasked to do right now, while acknowledging that commanders will always want more. Concerns about munition stockpiles are not limited to the U.S., though. Across the Middle East, U.S. partners have also relied heavily on high-end air defense systems to counter the Iranian missiles and the drone attacks that we've seen in the region. And many of them have raised similar concerns about how long those inventories can be sustained if this fighting continues. Countries like Israel, Saudi Arabia entered the conflict with deeper and more layered interceptor stockpiles, we're told. They built this up over the years of investment in missile defense systems. We're told that other Gulf allies, which operate smaller inventories and depend more heavily on U.S. to resupply them, could face greater pressure if the ceasefire breaks down and missile exchanges resume. During the real heavy usage times there, analysts say that the U.S. retains enough munitions to sustain current operations, but if it continues much longer, again, there may be concern. And the greater concern, of course, is whether the U.S. is prepared for a future conflict with someone like China, which likely would require sustained use of the same high-end missiles that we're now using and depleting, and could potentially need if China or Russia or one of these others decide, okay, they're in a weakened state, So we're going to take advantage of it. We're going to jump in here. Rebuilding those inventories, according to reports, could take years to do. Even before recent conflicts, it typically took about 2 years from contract award to initial delivery for many missile systems. And that was with full production ongoing. Now, the other problem that we could have here is these defense contractors could end up taking advantage of the government if we get into a phase to where we're trying to hurry up and produce more missiles. They're going to jump on that. They're going to pounce on that opportunity, and you got to believe that there's going to be some price gouging. It's going to cost us a lot more money to build those stockpiles back up. But we're told by the Secretary of War and others that defense contractors are stepping up their manufacturing process and their ability to try to raise production so that we can get those stockpiles back where they were. We'll see. But it is a little concerning, but I have to trust the Secretary of War. When he says we're okay, I've got to believe that we're going to be okay. Because, look, I don't know how long it takes to build these missiles. I don't know how many we had to begin with. I don't know how quickly we have depleted that supply. But I guarantee you that President Trump probably knows to the missile how many we have now and how many we could potentially need in a future conflict. Again, we'll just have to trust the ones who are in those leadership roles right now. Text me, email me, joey@joeyhudson.com. There's a moment no one wants to talk about with weight loss. It's the moment it stops working. Joey Hudson here. The diet that worked before doesn't. The workouts don't hit the same. Even eating less stops moving the scale. That's not random. That's your body protecting itself. Because when your body thinks it's under stress, it slows your metabolism, holds on to fat, and fights you every step of the way. That's why quick fixes eventually fail. Even the popular GLP-1 shots, they suppress appetite, but they don't fix what caused the problem. At PhD Weight Loss, they focus on restoring your metabolism so your body stops fighting you. That's when the real change happens. And right now, when you call and mention Joey, you're going to get 2 weeks free, and they'll pay for the cost of your food. Just call 864-644-1900. Do it right now and get ready for the summer. That's 864-644-1900, or go to myphdweightloss.com, because the goal isn't to lose weight once. It's to never have to start over again. Call today and tell them Joey sent you. What if I told you that during the World Cup, restaurants in America may start automatically adding a 20% tip to your bill, whether you like it or not? That's exactly what's now being discussed in Kansas City as officials prepare for an influx of international visitors. And folks, this story is about a whole lot more than just soccer, because millions of Americans are already fed up with tipping culture in this country. Coffee shops asking for tips, self-checkouts asking for tips, takeout counters, to-go orders asking for tips. And now restaurants are considering mandatory gratuities before customers even sit down. Can you believe it? So today, let's talk about what's really happening here, why restaurant officials say this is necessary, and whether America's tipping culture has gone too far. What do you think? Would you support automatic 20% gratuities during the World Cup? Or is this another example of tipping completely getting out of control? All right, let's get into it. Here's the story. Kansas City is set to host 6 World Cup matches when the tournament comes to the United States. And restaurant officials there expecting a massive economic boom. And good for them. I'm glad to hear it. We're talking about maybe $60 and $90 million flowing into local restaurants and bars during this tournament alone. But there's one concern restaurant leaders keep bringing up. Many international tourists, especially visitors from Europe, don't tip the same as Americans do. In many European countries, tipping either isn't expected or service charges are already included in the bill. The price you see is the final price. There's no awkward math, no guilt, no payment screen spinning around and asking if you want to leave an additional 25%. But here in America, tipping has become practically built into the system. And that's especially true in states where restaurants are allowed to pay tipped workers below minimum wage because gratuities are expected to make up the difference. So officials with the Missouri Restaurant Association are now recommending restaurants temporarily add an automatic 20% gratuity during the World Cup. Their argument's very simple. They don't want servers getting hurt financially because tourists don't understand American tipping customs. One restaurant official basically said, imagine spending 90 minutes taking care of a table only to get little or no tip because the customer simply didn't know better. And honestly, I can understand that concern. Most Americans want servers to be treated fairly. I do. I'm sure you do too as well. Restaurant works hard, long hours, demanding customers, high pressure. Nobody wants hardworking people getting shortchanged. We want them to be paid their value, what they're worth. But here's where this gets controversial. The moment a tip stops being voluntary, is it really a tip? Or is it just another fee? Because Americans are already experiencing serious tipping fatigue. And let's be honest here, tipping prompts are everywhere now. You buy a muffin, they spin the tip screen around. You pick up your own food, the tip screen pops up. You order a bottle of water at the airport, tip screen. At some point, people begin to feel like they're constantly being pressured to tip. And that pressure creates resentment, especially right now when families are already struggling with inflation. We're seeing higher grocery prices, rising insurance costs, expensive restaurant meals, gasoline. I mean, everything costs more money today. It's expensive to live. People notice when dinner costs twice what it did just a few years ago. And now imagine adding automatic gratuities on top of an already inflated price. That's why some restaurant owners themselves are even not quite sure they're sold on this deal. One Kansas City restaurant owner said many of his longtime customers already tip more than 20%, and he doesn't think it'll become a major problem. Honestly, he may have a point, because most people, especially tourists visiting another country, they generally want to do what is right if expectations are explained clearly up front, which raises another question. Why not simply communicate better? Put notices on menus. Explain American tipping customs very politely. Train staff to help international visitors understand the system. It's what I do when I travel abroad. I ask. Now, that feels a whole lot different than automatically adding charges to every bill because transparency matters. Consumers don't like being tricked. And one of the biggest concerns here is confusion. Will customers realize the gratuity was already included? Will some people accidentally tip twice? Will others walk away feeling like restaurants are sneaking hidden fees into the bill? These are real concerns. And this isn't just about the World Cup anymore. This has become part of a much larger national debate over tipping culture itself. What exactly are Americans paying for anymore? Is tipping meant to reward exceptional service, or has it become a substitute for businesses paying higher wages? That's the uncomfortable conversation sitting underneath all of this. And look, I don't think most Americans are against tipping. Far from it. Americans have traditionally been generous people, but they do want honesty. They want clarity. They want businesses to stop making every single transaction feel emotionally awkward. Because right now, consumers are exhausted. Economically exhausted. We're mentally exhausted. We're financially stretched very thin. And when people feel constantly nickeled and dimed, eventually they start pulling back altogether. That's what some industry experts are warning about right now. Restaurant traffic has already been declining in many areas because eating out has just become so expensive. You can't afford to go out as often anymore. And adding more automatic fees, even temporary ones, could push some customers away forever. Now, to be fair, restaurant officials insist this would only be temporary during the World Cup. And maybe in tourist-heavy areas, it does help to avoid some confusion. But if restaurants go this route, they better make it crystal clear up front, right? No surprises, no hidden fees, no awkward double tipping, because the World Cup should be a moment where America shows off its hospitality to the entire world. Not another example of why people are frustrated with the modern service economy. At the end of the day, this debate really comes down to something very simple. People don't mind paying for good service. What they do mind is feeling pressured, manipulated, or surprised after the meal's over. And whether you support automatic tipping or not, one thing is becoming very clear. America's tipping culture has reached a breaking point. All right, folks, I want to hear from you. You agree? Have we reached that breaking point? Should restaurants automatically add 20% gratuity for World Cup visitors? Or has tipping culture officially gotten out of control in America? Text me, email me, joeyhudson.com. Leave me a message on the MyPillow message line, 864-477-JOEY, 864-477-5639. And always use promo code Joey when you go to MyPillow.com or call 800-893-4059. Get a special deal right now on the standard classic MyPillows, regular $49.98. Only $17.98 when you use promo code Joey. Turn any mattress into the best mattress ever, made in the USA. MyPillow mattress toppers get up to $100 off when you use promo code Joey. And, of course, you can get the MyPillow Giza Dream Sheets or the 6-pack towel set. All great deals when you use promo code Joey. Go to MyPillow.com. Do it right now. Boy, what a day we had in the Palmetto State's capital yesterday. First, the Senate rejected a push to redraw the state's congressional lines just weeks before the primaries, with GOP leaders saying that it's legally unnecessary and wrong for South Carolina. So in a vote, 29-17, fell short of the two-thirds majority that needs approval for it to proceed. Officially, senators refused to add redistricting to a resolution setting the rules for what the legislature can do after the session ends on this Thursday. You may recall last week the House passed a sine die resolution that would include redistricting after Thursday. And they actually were having hearings in the Judiciary Committee yesterday about redistricting. They have been the House has looked at it sort of as we're full speed ahead. We're going to be ready if this happens. Now, the Senate's failure to include this was despite pressure from President Trump, who called GOP senators personally over the last week and publicly prodded the majority caucus through his social media platform like he often does. He wrote Monday night on Truth Social, "I'm watching closely, along with all Republicans across the country who are counting on their elected leaders to use every legal and constitutional authority they have to stop the radical left Democrats from destroying our country." However, Senate Majority Leader Shane Massey said legislators need to stand up for what's best for South Carolina. And an overhaul that postpones congressional primaries and discards absentee ballots that have already been cast for the June 9th primary, he said, especially from military members overseas who many have already voted, would create an all GOP delegation will ultimately backfire, he said. Overall, the confusion will lower voter turnout for a second set of primaries, he argued, while motivating angry Democrats to vote in force in November. And there's been this argument all along that the map that was circulated by the White House could potentially give South Carolina 2 Democrat congressional districts rather than the one we have now. There's been a lot of discussion on that map, and it also divides some long-time areas, like it cuts Greenville County in half, of course, cuts Spartanburg County in half, cuts Pickens in half. The majority leader also said that South Carolina shouldn't just take orders from Washington, no matter who's in the White House. Massey said the states are sovereign, independent creatures, giving his colleagues a history lesson of the country's founding and the rebel nature of South Carolina to begin with. He said, "I've got too much Southern in my blood. I've got too much resistance in my heritage to just rush through a map not created by South Carolinians." So we're going to see how that plays out. It didn't work too well for a group of Indiana senators who had crossed the White House, and the president went after 8. 5 of them won. Now, senators aren't on the ballot this fall. They have 2 more years on their term. So maybe they feel like in 2 years from now, people will have forgotten. President Trump will be on his way out of office. I don't know. And I pretty much have great regard for Shane Massey. He seems to know the pulse of South Carolina and what's best. But boy, he's going to have a lot of questions to answer on this one. Senate Minority Leader Brad Hutto agreed it's not right to take a map someone else gave us. And you need to understand that when we are redrawing these maps, typically it starts out about 2 years ahead of time. And certainly the bulk of the work is done over about a year's time with many meetings, many redraws, a lot of calculation on the population. So to do it in a matter of weeks, I get that. From day one, I have been a little scared of the idea that this might be rushed through. But at the same time, are we giving up a potential Republican seat? I don't know. And we may never know the real answer to that, because Jim Clyburn could have still ended up being reelected regardless of how his district was redrawn. Senator Chip Campson, he's a Republican from Isle of Palms, just outside of Charleston, noted that early voting starts in just 14 days. Other states that have changed their voting lines for the midterm elections did so months before people went to the polls, he said. The entire effort, of course, started just over a week ago with a House GOP caucus meeting. On Wednesday, the House voted along party lines to add redistricting to the sine die agreement. Legislation was fast-tracked, as the president suggested. Of course, after the U.S. Supreme Court threw out Louisiana's congressional map as unconstitutional racial gerrymandering, the White House urged Republican leaders in both chambers to look at the ruling and to look at redoing South Carolina's map with the goal of basically drawing Jim Clyburn out of a winning district. Again, the House Judiciary Committee was they had hearings. I watched some of it. It was primarily just Democrats complaining about how we should not be bullied by President Trump. And that some of them said that, bullied. They all spoke about the fact that President Trump should not be pressuring our legislature to do things. So this may not be over, probably is over. I can't imagine that in the next, basically we have today and tomorrow. I can't imagine anything would come up in that time. It's possible, though. Now, down the road, well, this is all going on yesterday, and then I don't know. Probably, I guess they were in the lobby of the State House, the news conference. Republican leaders had a news conference yesterday, led by Drew McKissick, chairman of the GOP, and the state party is going to challenge the state's open primary elections in federal court. Now, you may recall that earlier this year, when the South Carolina legislature was first going into session, I asked Drew McKissick the question about closing primaries. He said then, if the legislature does not come up with a plan to allow registration by party, we're going to sue them. We're going to sue the state. I asked him to clarify that because I didn't want to misunderstand him. He very clearly said, we will file a federal lawsuit if they don't do this. Well, they haven't, and they don't have time to do it now. So that's what's happening. The lawsuit, which party officials said they'll file within the month, comes after two bills that would have closed primaries stalled at the very beginning of the session. The proposal split the GOP caucus in the House, faced an uphill battle in the Senate, and would ultimately receive a veto from the governor. So they had very little chance of success, but they should have made something work. Chairman McKissick said this is the only alternative that we have left is to sue. Now, in the legal challenge, which McKissick again said will be has been coming for months, will argue that the state's open primaries violate the party's constitutional right under the First Amendment to decide who it does or does not associate with. Mr. McKissick said in the State House on the last week of the regular session that they are going to hold them accountable. The goal is to stop voters who aren't registered Republicans from voting in the GOP primaries. And this is something that all of you have agreed that we need to have. This is something that I've heard a lot about. Closing the primaries. We got to close the primaries. We can't have Democrats voting in Republican primaries. Letting non-Republicans vote in primary elections, McKissick said, is like allowing Carolina or Clemson fans to choose which players the other team will put on the field. It doesn't make any sense in football, and it sure doesn't make any sense in politics, he said. 2 GOP candidates for governor, Attorney General Alan Wilson, U.S. Representative Ralph Norman, joined McKissick at the news conference. Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evett and U.S. Representative Nancy Mason, Senator Josh Kimbrell have all publicly to also support closed primaries as well. They all agree on that. That's one issue that all the candidates for governor agree on, that we need to close our primaries. And you may recall this issue, which was given up on pretty early in the session after some House Republicans basically said, and this is, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but they basically said that there was no appetite in the state House to have the fight for closing the primaries this legislative session. They just didn't want to get bogged down with it. Because, yes, it probably would have been a bloodbath. Different people had different ideas of how to properly close the primaries. McKissick said the bottom line is, do we have a constitutional right to demand from state government the ability to register by party to enable us to make a decision? The point is we have no ability to even have the conversation right now, unfortunately, under state law. Closed primaries, of course, would shut the door on independent voters, potentially reducing the already low voter turnout in primary elections, according to some. And that's been a part of the argument in not closing them. One version of one of the bills would allow people, independents, to register the day of voting, but once they voted, they would remain registered for that party. And some people objected to that. So again, a lot of different opinions on how to accomplish it. It looks like, though, a judge is going to make the final decision as this heads to federal court. Your comments are welcome on the Furman Ford text line, 864-477-JOEY. That's 864-477-5639. Emails always welcome, joey@joeyhudson.com. Speaking of the Furman Ford text line, it's never been more important to support locally run businesses owned by people who actually live here in the upstate. Let me take a minute to talk with you about our friends at Furman Ford. If you're looking for a new vehicle, maybe a great pre-owned vehicle, one you can trust, or maybe you're looking to order that special vehicle. Either way, if you want a new one, a brand new one, or a pre-owned that you can trust, the folks at Furman Ford, they're there to help you. Their name is on the sign because their name is on the line, because every single transaction is important to them. Jim Furman, Matthew Furman. They do business the right way. When you stop by, when you give them a call, or maybe when you just send them a quick email, you're always going to have access to a member of the Furman Ford family. And by the way, they also offer great service, and you're not going to have to wait weeks and weeks to get it done. And you do not have had to purchase your vehicle at Furman Ford. Doesn't even have to be a Ford. They service all makes and models. Visit my friends at Furman Ford online at furmanford.com, furmanford.com. Seems like every other day there's news out of Minnesota and more fraud that's being uncovered, and that's what happened again yesterday. The growing corruption scandal out of Minnesota is raising some real serious questions about government oversight, taxpayer accountability, and whether political leaders looked the other way while billions literally disappeared under their noses. Now, one of the top Republicans in Congress is asking for answers. In fact, he's demanding answers. Tom Emmer is accusing Governor Tim Walz of presiding over what he calls a culture of corruption after federal prosecutors estimated fraud tied to Minnesota Medicaid programs could total a staggering $9 billion. $9 billion would it be? At a time when the country is struggling, families in Minnesota are struggling to afford groceries, gas, rent, health care. Taxpayers are learning that government programs meant to help vulnerable Americans may have been turned into a feeding trough for organized fraud schemes, primarily in the Somali community. The latest case may be one of the clearest examples that we've seen yet. Authorities in Minnesota have charged a man named Abdullah Muhammad in what prosecutors describe as a sophisticated food stamp fraud operation that allegedly stole more than $1 million through the SNAP program. So these people are taking money from programs designed to feed the hungry, to feed the less fortunate, and they're putting it in their greedy pockets. According to investigators, Mohammed allegedly used EBT cards registered to other people to buy products at Sam's Club and Costco, then allegedly resold those goods through his own grocery store. Well, you can turn a pretty good profit if you have $0 in your cost of goods, right? Investigators say that surveillance footage, along with GPS tracking, purchase records, has tied everything together in this case. And here's the part that should concern every American who hears this story. Authorities reportedly discovered many of the EBT cardholders were either out of the country or said they never even shopped at the stores where the purchases occurred. In other words, put very simply, prosecutors believe the system was being manipulated in plain sight. And yet somehow the money kept flowing. There was no end in sight. And this is exactly why Americans are losing confidence in government institutions at all levels. Because we keep hearing about a new case almost weekly, if not daily, of $1 million here, $50 million there, $100 million here, adds up to billions of dollars going into the pockets of these greedy, in a lot of cases, people who shouldn't even be in our country to begin with. I mean, it just makes me angry to think about this. Of all the people out there who needed food, who needed help, and some foreigner is probably sending the money back to Somalia. Hardworking taxpayers are told there's never enough money for roads, never enough money for schools, law enforcement, veterans. Social Security may be out of business soon. But yet, people in the government have allowed these crooks, these thieves, to take our money. Somehow there's always billions available to disappear in the fraud schemes before anybody notices. How does it happen? How? Because you look at some of the people who are involved being interviewed, and I don't mean this in the wrong way, they just don't look that smart. They don't sound that smart. But yet, they built our government out of billions. I mean, look, to be fair, fraud does happen. When you have a budget as big as ours, there's going to be some fraud. But boy, I mean, you'd think that this is just basic. No political party has a monopoly on corruption. We've seen it on both sides of the aisle. Now, recently it's been more so on the Democrat Party side, and Tim Walz has defended it in his state. But still, I mean, what critics are saying about Minnesota is that the scale of these scandals has become impossible to ignore. Remember, this isn't happening in isolation. Minnesota has already been rocked by the massive Feeding Our Future scandal involving federal child nutrition funds during the pandemic. That case alone resulted in dozens of indictments and allegations that hundreds of millions of dollars were stolen from programs intended to feed hungry children. And now we're learning investigators believe fraud tied to Medicaid and public assistance programs may be even larger than that. Congressman Emmer says Governor Walz needs to explain how this happened under his administration. And that's a fair question. Of course, we know that it led to Governor Walz deciding not to seek re-election. He dropped out of his re-election campaign because he knows that it happened on his watch, and he should have been watching a little closer. Leadership matters in cases like this. Oversight matters. Competence matters. If billions are disappearing from public programs, somebody in government either failed to do their job or ignored warning signs that should have triggered immediate action. Or maybe in this case, they were just afraid to be labeled as racist because they were targeting the Somalia community. And in Tim Walz's case, he certainly did not want to upset the apple cart. When he was touring around the country with Kamala Harris in 2024, trying to become the vice president. Americans are tired of hearing excuses after the fact. And we're tired of hearing promises, well, it'll never happen again. And it does. It keeps happening. One Republican lawmaker in Minnesota said the state has become target number one for fraudsters. Another said criminals have become so comfortable they no longer fear consequences. And think about that. When criminals believe government systems are weak, distracted, or politically protected, fraud becomes industrialized. It's just part of the overall scheme of things. It stops being isolated theft. It becomes a business model. It becomes these people get very creative in how they do these programs. And, of course, you and I are the victims. The taxpayer is the victims. Now, there's another important part of this story the national media is probably going to avoid. They don't want to discuss it. Many of these fraud investigations reportedly center around tightly connected networks operating within parts of Minnesota's Somali immigrant community. Again, they don't want to be labeled racist. They're afraid if you talk about the Somali community that you're going to be condemned, you're going to be labeled as a racist because these are people different from you. The fact should not lead to blanket accusations about an entire community. I'll give them that. We're not saying that all Somalis are bad people. Most Somali Americans are hardworking, law-abiding citizens trying to build better lives for their families just like everyone else. But when you ignore the patterns of organized fraud investigations because of political sensitivity, that doesn't help anybody. Law enforcement should follow evidence wherever it leads in whatever community it leads to. I don't care what the color of your skin is, what nationality you are, where you're from, what your religious beliefs are. If you're suspected, you should be investigated. It's just that simple. We got to put an end to it once and for all. That's it for today's edition of Just the Truth. Thanks for joining me in the PhD Weight Loss Studios. To lose weight for the last time, visit myphdweightloss.com. If you haven't joined my mailing list yet, visit my website, joeyhudson.com. Click on the Connect with Joey button so that you can receive our emails and the most up-to-date news. Also, join me on my YouTube channel. Be sure and like, comment, and subscribe. Just search for Joey Hudson. As always, thanks for spending a few minutes of your day with me. Do me a favor and forward this episode to a few friends. Just click on the share button and send to your contacts. We need to build an army of conservatives to win our country back, and we can do that by continuing to share the truth with our friends and family. Keep those comments coming via the Furman Ford text line 864-477-JOEY. Email to joey@joeyhudson.com, and I love your messages on the MyPillow message line. Again, that's 864-477-JOEY, 864-477-5639. Be sure and take advantage of the MyPillow special, just $14.88 on the standard MyPillows when you use promo code Joey. Order online at mypillow.com or call 800-893-4053. We're back again tomorrow and hope you'll plan to join us. Until then, remember, God's got this. He's still in control.